What I'm going to do right now is finish assembling this power base. A local player named Jonathan Taylor, a really nice guy, blows me up lots, 3D printed this thing for me that I designed. It's designed to fit underneath a large base, like this, and then the battery and the charging hardware will sit inside of the base, and then through the normal large base, we're actually going to run these the power up into the Lancer class pursuit craft. A couple things. I did notice that when I did design this thing, first of all, I made the nubs a little bit smaller than they're actually spec'd out to be. And I also noticed that where I put the power module, I put these little two nubs right there to hold it in place and a little gap so you can plug it in. Where the power pigtail sits is too short to actually reach up into the Lancer class pursuit craft. So I'm actually going to have to create a kind of a pigtail extension. Now, there are a couple of ways I could have done this that I thought about. First of all, I thought about using a DuPont connector, which are these typical jumper wire connectors like this, and they go right into headers like this, to kind of create a port where we could have a detachable pigtail. I decided against it, though, and the reason why is because I'm giving this to somebody who may plug it in backwards, and these DuPont connectors don't actually have a way of fixing what's called the polarity, right? So polarity is which way the current's supposed to go. I've got red and black. Red is supposed to be the positive voltage. Black is supposed to be the ground. If somebody was to plug it in backwards, then you could have a problem on your hands. However, with JSTPH connectors, they are meant to go in only one way. So therefore, if I use these JSTPH connectors, I can effectively finish off the pigtail without worrying about somebody plugging it in the wrong way. So what we'll do is first modify the base and then run some wires through it like this, and then we'll fuse the female end and the male end together through the base, and that'll allow the base to remain removable until somebody wants to glue it down and still be able to plug it into the power connector. Let's start by drilling into the base. I've got this 3/32 drill bit, and in this case I'm going to go ahead and use like a real drill. This is kind of dangerous, but unfortunately the chuck on a Dremel is not going to close around a bit this small. What I really should be using that Jonathan suggested to me are those little handheld drills that allow you to essentially place it on a surface and turn it with your hand. And they drill pretty straight, and they don't have like the danger of high-speed drills on weak plastic. But unfortunately, I just don't have any. Therefore, I'm just going to use this thing, and I just don't really want to wait around for Amazon to deliver one to me. So if I consider that this is the forward direction on the ship, then I want the hole to be right about there. And I'm going to drill 2 of them, 1 for each wire. And if those 2 holes turn into 1 hole, that's fine too. Awesome. I do notice that the advantage of using a regular hand drill or a regular power drill is that I do get variable speed on that. So while the Dremel works at 1 speed, I'm sure I could get some type of attachment or something to regulate the speed. My standard drill is going to work really well right here. So now that I've done that, I can run the wire through, and it looks like those holes are just big enough to jam 2 wires through. That's perfect. So I need to fuse these 2 pigtails together. Something interesting is going to happen though when I kind of adapt this pigtail to this pigtail over here. Notice that the JSTPH connector goes in like this, and if I do that, then all of a sudden red goes to red and black goes to black, and we're in good shape. But then when we come up here, you also need to make sure red goes to red and black goes to black, right? The best way to see whether or not that does work is to test it against another device to see whether or not it does supply power. And I'll just try this like this with this other device over here. Kind of jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but this means that power does go through. And I want the same effect to happen with the pigtail coming through the base. So to make sure that the polarity is correct, You don't really want to look at the wire so much as you do the connection on the other end of the wire. If it just so happens to be correct, then we'll be in good shape. But it is possible to wire this backwards, and that's super bad. So I will have red and red match up and make sure that it goes all the way through so that if I'm connecting the orientation right here and here, it looks exactly the same. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to first strip off the ends, expose some wire on both sides of the pigtail. This one too. I'll apply some solder, and then I'll use heat shrink tubing to shrink the whole thing together and insulate it. So what is heat shrink tubing? Well, it's basically your best friend, if I can find some here. So this is heat shrink tubing, and I'll show you a whole piece. There we go. So heat shrink tubing, basically it's what it sounds like. It's rubber tubing that when you apply hot air to it is going to shrink around the base. So if I do this, cut it in half, drop it in around this thing and let it fall to bottom. I can solder these ends together with the other pigtail, and then after I do that, move the heat shrink tubing up to here and then insulate it. So first I need some solder and to tin both sides. Once the wires are tinned, and because this is stranded wire, solder flows onto it pretty easily. I do the same thing to the other end of the pigtail. And all I have to do is heat up the solder until it's melty and then touch the ends together and then let it cool off really quick, and they should fuse together. The key here is to heat it up and let it cool off, not to hold on the iron, because that just keeps the solder from cooling and then solidifying to the other piece. And let's see if I can do that here as well. The second one is usually trickier. I hope I don't burn myself. Then I can slide the heat shrink tubing over the solder joints like this. And now I apply heat with a gun. So the hot air gun is available on Amazon.com. These are pretty cheap. They're about like $15, $20. And what they do is that when you apply hot air to the heat shrink tubing, they just blow like a regular old heat gun. Suppose you could use a hairdryer. This one gets pretty hot though. And then the tubing will actually shrink into place. And so you'll notice that has shrunk into place and it's insulated the joint. It hasn't necessarily made it that much stronger, but it should help insulate so that there isn't any shorts inside of our circuitry. So I'll turn that on, and then I will see whether or not it can power a device. If I plug it in correctly, light goes on, that means that everything is good to go inside of the power base. And all I have to do now is just glue everything into the inside.